All right, guys, here is chapter 23 in the black and white book. It is on page 250. And in the other book, in the brown one, it is on 265. All right, a splendid midsummer shone over England. Skies so pure, suns so radiant, as were then seen in long succession, seldom favor, even singly, over wave-girt land. It was as if a band of Italian days had come from the south, like a flock of glorious passenger birds, and lighted to the rest of them on the cliffs of Albion. The hay was all got in, the fields round Thornfield were green and shorn, the roads white and baked. The trees were in their dark prime, hedge and wood, full-leaved and deeply tinted, contrasted well with the sunny hue of the clear meadows between. This is another example of weather demonstrating how Jane feels. So she's really happy, and the weather shows that because, remember, she thinks that the engagement between Mr. Rochester and Miss Ingram is probably broken off. So there's like some hope going on. On Midsummer Eve, Adele, weary with gathering wild strawberries in Hay Lane half of the day, had gone to bed with the sun. I watched her drop asleep, and when I left her, I sought the garden. It was now the sweetest hour of the 24. Day its fervid fires had wasted, and dew fell cool on the panting plain and scorched summit. Where the sun had gone down in the simple state, pure of the pomp of clouds, spread of solemn purple, burning with the light of red jewel and furnace flame at one point, on the hill peak, and extending high and wide, soft and still softer over half heaven. The east had its own charm of fine deep blue, and its own modest gem, a rising and solitary star. Soon it would boast the moon, but she was yet beneath the horizon. So it's sunset. That's why we're getting these images of red and orange and yellow, and then in the east it is blue and purple because the sun is setting in the west. I walked a while on the pavement, but a subtle, well-known scent, that of a cigar, stole from some window. I saw the library casement open a handbreadth. I knew I might be watched thence, so I went apart into the orchard. So, of course, who smokes cigars in this house? Mr. Rochester. And Jane is avoiding him. She doesn't want to see him because it's awkward since she last said that home is wherever he is forever. So she doesn't want to have that interaction with him. She's all like, No nook in the grounds more sheltered and more Eden-like. It was full of trees. It bloomed with flowers. A very high wall shut it out from the court on one side. On the other, a beech avenue screened it from the lawn. At the bottom was a sunk fence, its sole separation from lonely fields, a winding walk bordered with laurels and terminating in a giant horse chestnut, circled the base by a seat. Led down the fence, here one could wander unseen. While such a honeydew fell, such silence reigned, such glooming gathered. I felt as if I could haunt such shade forever, but in threading the flower and fruit pear trees at the upper part of the enclosure, on this more open quarter, my step is stayed, not by sound, not by sight, but once more by a warning fragrance. So Jane goes into the garden, and it's Eden-like, which is important. That's important to make note of the fact that it's Eden-like. You're going to find out why in a second. And this warning fragrance of the cigar smoke is following her, which means Mr. Rochester is behind her or near her somewhere. But it's sunset, it's getting dark, so she can't really see him too well. Sweetbriar and southernwood jasmine, pink and rose, have long been yielding their evening sacrifice of incense. This new scent is neither of shrub nor flower. It is, I know it well, it is Mr. Rochester's cigar. I look round and I listen. I see trees laden with ripening fruit. I hear a nightingale warbling in a wood half a mile off. No moving form is visible, no coming step audible, but that perfume increases. I must flee, again, because it's awkward. I make for the wicket leading to the shrubbery, and I see Mr. Rochester entering. I step aside into the ivy recesses. He will not stay long. He will soon return whence he came, and if I sit still, he will never see me. But no, eventide is as pleasant to him as it is to me, and this antique garden as attractive, and he strolls on, now lifting the gooseberry branches to look at the fruit, large as plums, with which they are laden, now taking a ripe cherry from the wall, now stooping towards a knot of flowers, either to inhale their fragrance or to admire the dew beads on their petals. A great moth goes humming by me. It alights on a plant at Mr. Rochester's foot. He sees it and bends to examine it. Now he has his back towards me, thought I, and he is occupied too. Perhaps if I walk softly, I can slip away unnoticed. I trod on an edging of turf at the crackle of the pebbly gravel might not betray me. He was standing among the beds at a yard or two distant from where I had to pass. The moth imperatively engaged him. I shall get by very well, I meditated, so he's stooping looking at a moth, and she's like, here's my chance. As I crossed the shadow thrown long over the garden by the moon, not yet risen high, he said quietly without turning, Jane, come and look at this fellow, because he had clearly seen her. I had made no noise. He had not eyes behind. Could the shadow feel? I started at first, and then I approached him. Look at his wings, said he. He reminds me rather of a West Indian insect. One does not often see so large and gay a night rover in England. There he is flown. The moth roamed away. I was sheepishly retreating also, but Mr. Rochester followed me, and then we reached the wicket. He said, Turn back. On so lovely a night it is a shame to sit in the house, and surely no one can wish to go to bed while sunset is thus at meeting with moonrise. It is one of my faults that though my tongue is sometimes prompt enough to add an answer, there are times when it sadly fails me in framing an excuse, and always the lapse occurs at some crisis when a facile word or plausible pretext is specially wanted to get me out of painful embarrassment. And she's embarrassed because she loves him, and she knows she can't have him. I did not like to walk at this hour alone with Mr. Rochester in the shadowy orchard, because it's romantic, but I could not find a reason to allege for leaving him. I followed with lagging step, and thoughts busily bent on discovering a means of extrication. But he himself looked so composed and so grave also, I became ashamed of feeling any confusion. The evil, if evil existent or prospective there was, seemed to lie with me only. His mind was unconscious and quiet. So she's saying that he looks like he needs somebody to talk to, so she feels bad for wanting to leave. Jane, he recommenced as we entered the laurel walk, and slowly strayed down in the direction of the sunk fence and the horse chestnut. Thornfield is a pleasant place in summer, is it not? Yes, sir. You must have become in some degree attached to the house, you who have an eye for natural beauties and a good deal of the organ of adhesiveness. I am attached to it indeed. And though I don't comprehend how it is, I perceive you have acquired a degree of regard for that foolish little child Adele, too, and even for simple Dame Fairfax. Yes, sir, in different ways I have an affection for both, and would be sorry to part with them. Yes. Pity, he said and sighed and paused. It is always the way of events in this life, he continued presently. No sooner have you got settled in a pleasant resting place than a voice calls out to you to rise and move on, for the hour of repose is expired. Must I move on, sir, I asked. Must I leave Thornfield? I believe you must, Jane. I'm sorry, Janet, but I believe indeed you must. This was a blow, because that's confirmation that he's getting married. The fact that she must leave Thornfield suggests that she can't be in the same house with Miss Ingram, so she must go. But I did not let it prostrate me. Well, sir, I shall be ready when the order to march comes. It is come now. I must give it tonight. That was quick, right? He's like, okay, pack your crap, let's go. Then are you going to be married, sir? Exactly. Precisely. With your usual acuteness, you have hit the nail straight on the head, and he's being kind of sardonic and kind of jerky. Soon, sir? Very soon, my, that is, Miss Eyre. And you'll remember, Jane, the first time I, or rumor, plainly intimated to you that it was my intention to put my old bachelor's neck into the sacred noose, that's a nice way to think about it, to enter into the holy estate of matrimony, to take Miss Ingram to my bosom, in short. She's an extensive armful because she has so much bosom. But that's not to the point. One can't have too much of such a very excellent thing as my beautiful Blanche. Well, as I was saying, listen to me, Jane. You're not turning your head to look after more moths, are you? No, she's turning her head because she's going to cry. That was only a lady clock child flying away home. I wish to remind you that it was you who first said to me, with the discretion I respect in you, with that foresight, prudence, and humility which befit your responsible and dependent position, that in case I married Miss Ingram, both you and little Adele had better trot forthwith. I pass over the sort of slur conveyed in this suggestion on the character of my beloved. Indeed, when you are far away, Janet, I'll try to forget it. I shall notice only its wisdom, which is such that I have made my law of action. So it's a suggestion that Miss Ingram is so self-centered she can't live with Adele and Jane. And he's like, I'll forgive that after you've gone. He's being very cold about all of this. And again, we know he feels something for her because he tried to get her to take action. And now, seeing that she is taking no action, he's like, all right, fine, this is how it's going to be then. Adele must go to school, and you, Miss Eyre, must get a new situation. Yes, sir. I will advertise immediately. And meantime, I suppose... I was going to say, suppose I may stay here till I find another shelter to betake myself to, but I stopped, feeling it would not do to risk a long sentence, for my voice was not quite under command. She'd start crying if she realized she had to leave tonight. In about a month, I hope to be a bridegroom, continued Mr. Rochester, and in the interim I shall myself look out for employment and asylum for you. Thank you, sir. I am sorry to give... Oh, no need to apologize. I consider that when a dependent does her duty well, as you have done yours, she has a sort of claim upon her employer for a little assistance he can conveniently render her. I indeed have already thought of my future mother-in-law, heard of a place that I think will suit. It is to undertake the education of the 5 daughters of Mrs. Dionysius O'Gall of Butternut Lodge, Connaught, Ireland. You'll like Ireland, I think. They're such warm-hearted people there, they say. Ireland is really far away from where they are in England. So it would be a week's travel there. That's several hundred miles away from Mr. Rochester. So Jane is going to be very distraught about that because it's basically saying goodbye forever. It's a long way off, sir. No matter, a girl of your sense would not object to the voyage or the distance. Not the voyage, but the distance. And then the sea is a barrier. From what, Jane? From England and from Thornfield and... She needs to say it. Well? From you, sir. I said this most involuntarily, and with as little sanction of free will, my tears gushed out. And finally, here's the emotion we've been waiting for. I did not cry so as to be heard, however. I avoided sobbing. The thought of Mrs. O'Gall and Bitternut Lodge struck cold to my heart, and colder the thought of all the brine and foam, destined as it seemed to rush between me and the master whose side I now walked. The coldest the remembrance of the wider ocean. Wealth, caste, custom intervened between me and what I naturally and inevitably loved. Everything is hitting her right now. The distinction in class, the distinction in wealth, everything, what's the ocean that's going to separate them, it's all crashing down on her now. It is a long way, I said again. It is, to be sure. And when you get to Bitternut Lodge, Connaught, Ireland, I shall never see you again, Jane. That's morally certain. I never go to Ireland, not having much myself of a fancy for the country. We have been good friends, Jane, have we not? Yes, sir. And when friends are on the eve of separation, they like to spend what little time that remains to them close to each other. Come, we'll walk over the voyage and the parting quietly, half an hour or so, while the stars enter into the shining life up in heaven yonder. Here is the chestnut here. Here is the bench and its old roots. Come, be destined to sit here together. He seated me and himself. It's a long way to Ireland, Janet, and I'm sorry to send my little friend on such weary travels. But if I can't do better, how is it to be helped? Are you anything akin to me, do you think, Jane? I could risk no sort of answer at this time. My heart was full. She's too sad to speak. Because, he said, I sometimes have a queer feeling with regard to you, especially when you are near me as now. It is as if I had a string somewhere under my left ribs, tightly and inextricably knotted to a similar string situated the corresponding quarter of your little frame. He's saying it feels like there's a string attaching them from the left side under their ribs, which is where your heart is. He's basically saying his heart is attached to her heart. He's saying that he loves her without saying that he loves her. And if that boisterous channel and 200 miles or so of land come broad between us, I am afraid that cord of communion will be snapped, and then I've nervous notion I should be take to bleeding inwardly. As for you, you'd forget me. So he's kind of calling her out right now. He's saying that if we were separated in this way, I would bleed internally because of how I feel for you. But you would forget me because you don't care about me. He's prodding her to get her to tell him how she really feels. That I never should, sir, you know. Impossible to proceed. Jane, do you hear that nightingale singing in the wood? Listen. In listening, I sobbed convulsively, for I could repress what I endured no longer. I was obliged to yield, and was shaken from head to foot with acute distress. When I did speak, it was only to express an impetuous wish that I had never been born, nor never come to Thornfield. Because you are sorry to leave it. The vehemence of emotion stirred by grief and love within me was claiming mastery and struggling for full sway and asserting a right to predominate, to overcome, to live, rise, and reign at last. Yes, and to speak. So her emotion is taking over her logic in this moment. It's coming out of her as though she has no control over it. I grieve to leave Thornfield. I love Thornfield. I love it because I have lived in it full and delighted life. Momentarily at least, I have not been trampled on. I have not been petrified. I have not been buried with inferior minds and excluded from every glimpse of communion with what is bright and energetic and high. I have talked face to face with what I reverence, with what I delight in, with an original and vigorous expanded mind. I have known you, Mr. Rochester, and it strikes me with terror and anguish to feel I absolutely must be torn from you forever. I see the necessity of departure, and it is like looking at the necessity of death. That's a little dramatic, but she says it's like looking at death to contemplate ever leaving him, which, is truly how she feels. But she still hasn't said it. She still hasn't said, because I love you, I cannot leave. Where do you see the necessity? He asked suddenly. So he's like, why is it necessary for you to leave? Where you, sir, have placed it before me. In what shape? In the shape of Miss Ingram, a noble and beautiful woman, your bride. She's like, Miss Ingram, your bride is the reason I must leave. You just said it yourself. My bride? What bride? I have no bride. What? So he's saying, I don't have a bride. I don't know what you're talking about. But you will have. Yes, I will, he set his teeth. Then I must go. You have said it yourself. No, you must stay. I swear it, and the oath shall be kept. I tell you I must go, I retorted, roused to something like passion. This next section I need you to make note of. This is pretty much the most proto-feminist thing that Jane is ever going to say. She's going to say, despite class, despite being a woman, she is in equal standing with Mr. Rochester. Do you think I can stay to become nothing to you? Do you think I am an automaton, a machine without feelings, and can bear to have my morsel of bread snatched from my lips and my drop of living water dashed from my cup? Do you think because I am poor, obscure, plain, and little, I am soulless and heartless? You think wrong. I have as much soul as you, and full as much heart. And if God had gifted me with some beauty and much wealth, I should have made it as hard for you to leave me as it is now for me to leave you. I'm not talking to you now through the medium of custom, conventionalities, or even of mortal flesh. It is my spirit that addresses your spirit, just as if both had passed through the grave and we stood at God's feet, equal as we are. As we are, repeated Mr. Rochester. So, he added, enclosing me in his arms, gathering me to his breast and pressing my lips on his lips. So, Jane. Yes, so, sir, I rejoined, and yet not so, for you are a married man, or as good as married, so he's trying to kiss her, and she's like, get off of me, you're an engaged man, don't go there. And wed to one inferior to you, to one with whom you have no sympathy, whom I do not believe you truly love. It's all truth is all that's coming out now. For I have seen and heard you sneer at her. I would scorn such a union, therefore I am better than you, let me go. So now, not even equal, I am better than you because I would never stoop to marry someone I do not love. Where, Jane, to Ireland? Yes, to Ireland. I have spoken my mind and can go anywhere now. And make note of this section. Jane, be still. Don't struggle so like a wild, frantic bird that is rending its own plumage in its desperation. I am no bird. No net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will, which I now exert to leave you. Proto-feminism. She is a human being. She has nothing, class, nothing will keep her from staying with him. Because she's not going to stick around to be his plaything, to be his mistress. No thanks. Another effort to set me at liberty, and I stood erect before him. And your will shall decide your destiny, he said. I offer you my hand, my heart, and a share of all my possessions. He's like, let's get married. Just saying. You play a farce, which I merely laugh at. She's like, you're just messing with me. I ask you to pass through life at my side, to be my second self, my best earthly companion. For that fate you have already made your choice and must abide by it. Jane, be still a few moments. You are overexcited. I will be still too. A waft of wind came sweeping down the laurel walk and trembled through the boughs of the chestnut. I wandered away to an indefinite distance. It died. The nightingale's song was then the only voice of the hour. In listening to it again, I wept. Mr. Rochester sat quiet, looking at me gently and seriously. Some time passed before he spoke. He at last said, "Come to my side, Jane, and let us explain and understand one another. I will never again come to your side. I am torn away now and cannot return. But Jane, I summon you as my wife. It is you only I intend to marry." I was silent. I thought he mocked me. "Come, Jane, come hither. Your bride stands between us." He rose with a stride, reached me. "My bride is here," he said again, drawing me to him, "because my equal is here, and my likeness. Jane, will you marry me?" It is important that he is saying, you are my equal, and that is why I want to marry you. Even though we're not equal in class, we are equal in spirit. Okay, make note of that. That's important. Still I did not answer, and still I writhed myself from his grasp, for I was still incredulous. "Do you doubt me, Jane? Entirely. You have no faith in me, not a whit. Am I a liar in your eyes?" he asked passionately. "Little skeptic, you shall be convinced." Now this is important because this is how Mr. Rochester truly feels. "What love have I for Miss Ingram? None, and that you know. What love has she for me? None, as I have taken pains to prove. I caused a rumor to reach her that my fortune was not a third of what was supposed, and after I presented myself to see the result, it was coldness both from her and her mother." So after he, as dressed as the gypsy, told her that he didn't have any money, he got coldness from them both, and he was like, "I see how it really is. Let's break this off. I could not marry Miss Ingram. You strange, you almost unearthly thing I love as my own flesh. You, poor and obscure and small and plain as you are, I entreat you to accept me as a husband." Huge deal that he's like, who cares about class? I love you for who you are. "What, me?" I ejaculated, beginning in his earnestness, and especially with his incivility to credit his sincerity. "Me, who have not a friend in the world but you. If you are my friend, not a shilling, but what have you given me?" "You, Jane, I must have you for my own, entirely my own. Will you be mine? Say yes, quickly." "Mr. Rochester, let me look at your face. Turn to the moonlight." "Why?" "Because I want to read your countenance. Turn." "There, you will find it scarcely more legible than a crumpled, scratched page. Read on, only make haste, for I suffer." She wants to make sure he's being real with her. His face was very much agitated, and very much flushed, and there was strong workings in the features, and strange gleams in the eyes. "Oh, Jane, you torture me," he exclaimed. "With that searching and yet faithful and generous look, you torture me." "How can I do that? If you are true and you offer real, my only feelings to you must be gratitude and devotion. They cannot torture." "Gratitude!" ejaculated and added widely. "Jane, accept me quickly. Say Edward. Give me my name. Edward, I will marry you." "Are you in earnest? Do you truly love me? Do you sincerely wish me to be your wife?" "I do, and if an oath is necessary to satisfy you, I will swear it." "Then, sir, I will marry you." Yay! "Edward, my little wife, dear Edward, come to me entirely now," said he, and added in his deepest tone, speaking in my ear as his cheek was laid on mine, "Make my happiness, I will make yours." "God pardoned me," he subjoined ere long, "and man meddle not with me. I have her, and I will hold her." "There is no one to meddle, sir. I have no kindred to interfere." "No, that is the best of it," he said. And if I loved him less, I should have thought his accent and look of exultation savage. But sitting by him, roused from the nightmare of parting, called to the paradise of union, I thought only of the bliss given me to drink in such abundant flow. He has a savage look in his eye or on his face. That's important to note, because she's saying that she neglected to notice it before, that there's something else going on. It's kind of a foreshadow. Again and again he said, "Are you happy, Jane?" And again I answered yes. After which he murmured, "It will atone, it will atone. I have not found her friendless and cold and comfortless. Will I not guard and cherish and solace her? Is there not love in my heart and constancy in my resolves? It will expiate a God's tribunal. I know my Maker sanctions what I do. For the world's judgment I wash my hands thereof. For man's opinion I defy it." He's saying that what he's doing is justified. Who he's saying it to, we're not really sure. He's saying, I'm doing a good thing. This is justified in what I do. Which suggests to us that he is paying some kind of penance. Maybe it has something to do with Grace Poole. We don't really know. But he's definitely asking for either not forgiveness, but for God to kind of look the other way about what he's doing, which is strange. Now, this next part is important. The weather is going to change. And we always know that when weather changes in a Gothic novel, it is not always a good thing. But what had befallen the night? The moon was not yet set, and we were all in shadow. I could scarcely see my master's face, near as I was. And what ailed the chestnut tree? It writhed and groaned while wind roared in the laurel walk and came sweeping over us. So now there's a heavy wind, and it's causing the chestnut tree to creak. "We must go in," said Mr. Rochester. "The weather changes." "I could have sat with thee till morning, Jane. And so, thought I, could I with you. I should have said so, perhaps, but a livid, vivid spark leapt out of the cloud at which I was looking, and there was a crack, a crash, and a close rattling peal, and I thought only of hiding my dazzled eyes against Mr. Rochester's shoulder. Lightning has struck right near them. The rain rushed down. He hurried me up the walk through the grounds and into the house, but we were quite wet before we could pass the threshold. He was taking off my shawl in the hall and shaking the water out of my loosened hair when Mrs. Fairfax emerged from her room. I did not observe her at first, nor did Mr. Rochester. The lamp was lit. The clock was on the stroke of 12. "Hasten to take off your wet things," said he, "and before you go, good night, my darling." He kissed me repeatedly. When I looked up on leaving his arms, there stood the widow, pale, grave, and amazed. I only smiled at her and ran upstairs. So Mrs. Fairfax sees this, and she's looking very judgmentally at what's happening. Obviously, there's a difference in class, but there's also some other stuff going on there. So we want to make sure that we're making note of all of that stuff. Let's see. Explanation will do for another time, thought I. Still, when I replaced the chamber, I felt a pang at the idea she should even temporarily misconstrue what she had seen. But joy soon effaced the other feelings, and loud. So she's like, "I'll deal with it later." And fierce, frequent as the lightning gleamed, cataract-like as the rain fell during the storm of a 2 hours' duration, I experienced no fear and little awe. Mr. Rochester came thrice to my door in the course of it, to ask if I was safe, tranquil, and that was comfort. That was strength for anything. Before I left my bed in the morning, little Adele came running in to tell me that the great horse chestnut at the bottom of the orchard had been struck by lightning in the night, and half of it split away. The tree split in half. There's a separation. That's an omen. That's not a good thing. Make note of it. Okay? That is chapter 23, and we'll talk about it tomorrow.